We are grading, um, basically, we're grading President Biden on the news conference he had the other day. President Joe Biden made a lot of news at his marathon press conference last week, but not every reporter covered themselves in the glory. For Biden, the whole thing about that speech, it had a lot of mixed results. Um, President Biden surprised many when, after months of criticism for not doing more formal press conferences, he went rogue and kept taking questions long after the pressers expected an endpoint. Now, it was a winning decision that prompted positive coverage and had White House reporters calling it the longest news conference in presidential history. It went on for like 2 hours, if not longer. Um, on the substance, President Biden demonstrated command of the issues and stamina and a surplus of the plain spokenness that he's known for, which also caused some trouble. On style points, on what we refer to as style points, Biden did visibly struggle at times to fight through the artifacts of the stutter that he has struggled with for most of his life. In fact, what his supporters are well acquainted with by now. And he wandered pretty far off topic during a one question about the political effect of the school closures. Now, the happy accident there is that it morphed into a soliloquy about the state of modern media and cable news right in the wheelhouse. Um, President Biden also displayed toughness, hitting back at criticisms, sometimes viscerally, and warning global rabbles in what some journalists refer to as stark terms. He displayed that 1,000-watt charm as well. At one point, zinging faux correspondent Peter Doocy by saying, "You always ask me the nicest questions," and right after Ducey replied, "All right, I got a full binder full." Biden said, and none of those questions make sense," which is true. I think the fair-minded Americans who watched and saw what I saw, a president speaking with authority, expertise, and authenticity, and the tactic of answering questions till they drop is one Biden should use more often. But the media are most of it did not perform as well in my view. And by the way, despite what some may think, I don't believe that there's any chance Biden's audible caught the White House press secretary John Psaki by surprise. The president certainly must have told Psaki he might go long, and she probably tried to talk him out of doing a longer press conference, and Psaki probably cringed when the boss called on disgraced ex faux sycophant James Rosen of conspiracy mongering Newsmax, which is another fake news site. But surprisingly, I would not count Rosen as one of the worst questioners. Citing a poll that found 49% of registered voters disagreed with the statement Joe Biden is mentally fit, but only Republicans answered with a majority at 84%. And Rosen asked, why do you suppose that such large segments of the American electorate have come to harbor such profound concerns about your cognitive fitness?" Yeah, I say the same thing about Trump. I have no idea was President Biden's response, which seems to be an emergent theme for a garden variety troll to this. And think of his response to the "Let's Go Brandon" dad who tried to ruin Christmas. And was it an unpleasant question, or was it rude and shitty? Yes and yes. But Rosen cited actual data and posed the question fairly. If President Biden had chosen to, he could have elaborated or rattled off an answer like curtain flag reporter Chair Psaki, and that would cause cringing. But even Ducey's question, why are you trying so hard in your first year to pull the country so far to the left, which he isn't? And that was a gift to Biden, allowing him to burnish his moderate image by allowing him to rattle off accomplishments and remind Ducey that you guys have been trying to convince me that I am Bernie Sanders. He says I'm not. I like him. He's like, but I am no Bernie. I am not a socialist. He says I am a mainstream Democrat, I'm a mainstream Democrat. And he's like, and I've always have been. And no, some of the worst questions were from reporters trying hard to misunderstand the president's remarks about Ukraine and expelling the bad takes on the voting rights. But the award for worst question has to go to NBC News' Kristen Welker, who actually finished in a tie with the foe. Welker started off well enough with a fairly decent follow up about Ukraine and a question about voting rights activists who skipped Biden's speech. Now Welker hit a dumb shit twofer by asking that you put Vice President Harris in charge of voting rights. Are you satisfied with her work on this issue, and can you guarantee, or do you even commit that she will be your running mate in 2024, providing that you run again for a second term. The administration and the president have been saying for almost a year that Vice President Kamala Harris will be on the ticket for 2024, and yet reporters keep asking this dumb and fucking insulting question, and basically Biden responded with yes and yes, but Walker was not content to just take the L. Basically, Walker answered it this way, put it this way, okay, you don't care to expand, and Biden said, pardon me, and basically she changed up the question, do you care to expand? And basically, Biden said there's no need to expand on this issue, and Walker says, what about voting? Basically, Biden responded with, I asked, she is going to be my running mate, number one, and number two, I did put her in charge, and she's doing a great job according to his mind, yeah. And then Walker managed to ask her third and fourth top tier clown shit questions. Let me ask you this. Big picture, particularly when you think about voting rights and the struggles you've had to unify your own party around voting rights, unity was one of your key campaign promises. In fact, in your inaugural address, you said your whole soul was in bringing America together and uniting our people. People heard the speech that you gave on voting rights in Georgia recently, in which you described that those who are opposed to you and to George, and you basically say that when they're opposed to you, basically you're putting George Wallace and Jefferson Davis in there, and some people took exception to that. Now, what do you say to those who are offended by your speech and in this country, and basically being more unified than it was when you first took office? Now, Walker isn't the only journalist to pearl clutch on behalf of offended opponents of voting rights, but she was the one who did it at the press conference right after two other terrible questions, and her second question was terrible by implication, and the implication being that Biden is at default for the disunity that we're facing. Actually, no, that was Trump that did that. It's an ugly implication that she spelled out on the first time that she asked this question to Psaki a few weeks ago. And when Biden laid the blame where it belongs, with Republicans who are obstructing voting rights and supporting the insurrectionist former squatter who has spent the past year fomenting another insurrection, Walker was like, but Mr. President, is the country more unified than you were when you first took office? And things got worse from there. After the press conferences, the mainstream media ran with two bad faith narratives about things President Biden said or did. The first was the notion that he gave a green light for a minor incursion by Russia into Ukraine, and the false idea that Psaki had to clean up those remarks by literally saying exactly what Biden had said. President Biden said, I think that what we're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable for if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion, and then we end up having a fight about what to do and what not to do, etc. It was clear to some that the remark was intended to describe a less clear-cut situation that could lead to disagreement among the NATO allies. But the green light narrative became the big headline, except Biden was asked if that's what he meant, and he explained it the same way that Psaki did. Now here's in depth about the question. Are you saying that a minor incursion by Russia into Ukraine territory would not lead to the sanctions that you have threatened, or are you effectively giving Putin permission to make a small incursion into the country? No, he's not. But President Biden said, good question. That's how it did sound like, didn't it? The most important thing to do, big nations can't bluff, number one. And number two, the idea that we would do anything to split NATO, which would have a profound impact on one of the, and he says, I think the most prominent impact on this, one of Putin's objectives is to weaken NATO, and that would be a big fucking mistake. So, so the question that we all face is, if it's something significantly short of a significant invasion, or even if it's not significant, just major military forces coming across, for example, it's one thing to determine that if they continue to use cyber efforts, well, we can respond the same way with cyber. And they have what they call FSB people in Ukraine that are now trying to undermine the solidarity within Ukraine about Russia and try to promote the Russian interest. But it's very important that we keep everyone in NATO on the same page, and that's what we've been spending a lot of time doing. And there are differences in NATO as to what countries are willing to do, depending on what happens and the degree to which they're able to go about doing that. Biden also likely had the former President Barack Obama's red line on Syria in mind as well, as evidenced by the big nations can't bluff remark. The other big media headline was the idea that Biden tried to delegitimize the 2022 election, and that was somehow equivalent to Trump's insurrectionist big lie. Some were still not satisfied when Psaki clarified that President Biden was explaining that the results would be illegitimate if states do what the former squatter asked them to do after the 2020 election: toss up ballots and overturn results after the fact. The big lie is putting our democracy at risk, and we're fighting to fucking protect it. Biden's remarks were a bit sloppy again, but the man struggles with the stutter, but his remarks are entirely consistent with what Psaki had said. And still, that answer left me wishing that Biden had gone a little bit further, as Psaki did a few days ago when she said that there's a night and day difference between fomenting an insurrection based on lies totally debunked by 80 different judges, including the ones that were appointed by Trump, and the election authorities across the country, and making objective, true statements, which is what President Biden made yesterday about the effects of coordinated nationwide effort to undermine the constitutional rights to vote. And that's a message that the pearl clutchers need to hear, especially someone like Jake Tapper, who went so far as to admit that America disenfranchises minority voters and already has, but added, if any election like that is an illegitimate election, point me to one American election that's been legitimate throughout history. Overall, I'd give President Biden an A, because I do think that there are some off moments, like his continued insistence that the Republican obstructionism is somehow surprising, but the length of the presser not only earned him some good press, but likely some goodwill from the media. The media, with a few exceptions, get to see, because while there was a lot of garbage, there were some very good questions that were asked by some of the reporters, and at least one cable news personality, Caitlin Collins, got something right in the aftermath. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.